Welcome to this session on policy and regulatory framework for geothermal projects. I'm so happy that we have a session early morning on the first big day, and all the attention span is fully working and people are actually listening, so I'm really happy with that. This is a rare occasion here in Iceland. We have good weather, so you're welcome. This is all done for you. But let's get serious. We have a very interesting panel ahead of us. And now, as we stand at the crossroads of a global energy transformation, the importance of geothermal energy cannot be overstated. This renewable resource holds tremendous promise for providing sustainable, reliable, and clean energy to millions around the world, increasing the quality of life, as I believe here in Iceland we can all agree on. However, the journey from geothermal potential to geothermal power production is complex and multifaceted. It's not just about harnessing the Earth's heat in the most effective way, it's also about navigating the labyrinth of policies, regulations, and standards that govern the development and operation of geothermal projects. This is where our discussion today becomes crucial. Talking about what we have learned, what has played a role in the success stories, and what has pulled us back to the starting point again. Effective policy and regulatory frameworks are the backbone of a successful geothermal project, as well as the actual existence of water and steam, of course. They ensure that the development is not only economically viable, but also environmentally sustainable and socially responsible. Policies shape the market landscape. They influence investment decisions and drive innovation. Regulations provide the necessary safeguards to manage risks, protect public and environmental health, and ensure fair access to geothermal resources. But both policy and regulation can also complicate or slow down the development needed for a successful energy transition. In this session, we will dive into the most urgent topics and learn from each other about what works and what doesn't. Our distinguished panel of experts brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to this discussion. They represent diverse viewpoints from policymakers, regulators, industry leaders, and academic researchers. And together they will provide us with valuable insights into the current state of geothermal policy and regulation and the pathways forward. My name is Þorbergsdóttir, and I am the Director of New Energy at Reykjavík Energy. I have been working in the energy sector for 15 years now as a lawyer, mostly for the National Energy Authority, for BBA Legal, for On Power, and now Reykjavík Energy. But let's dive into the discussion and explore how we can collectively advance geothermal through well-thought policies and effective regulation. And let's start with our first speaker, Mrs. Elizabeth Henriquez. She is a licensed geologist and has been working for LAGEO since 1999, so 25 years. She is a founding member and ambassador of WING El Salvador. She is a recipient of WING Global Core Value Award in 2021. She's a member of the board of directors of the IGA. She's a delegate at the technical group of geoscience of the Central American Integration System, the SICA, and she is also a member of the Women's Working Group of UN Expert Research Management. Welcome to Elizabeth.
Good morning. I hope you can see me. So I can see a lot of women here. That's very good. So I'm Elizabeth. I'm actually working in LAGEO as a geologist, and I am part of the technical group of geosciences in SICA, is the Central American Integration System, and I am sponsored by the Federal Institute of Geosciences and Natural Resources of Germany here. So the contents are introduction, what is UNFC, the application. I'm just talking on El Salvador. I'm not going to include Costa Rica, and the lessons learned and opportunities. So the Central American Integration System, or SICAN in Spanish, is an economic and political entity whose main objective is to achieve the integration of the Central American countries as a region of peace, freedom, democracy, and development. So there are 8 countries included: Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, and the Dominican Republic. In the SICA region, as I told you, there are 74% of the total electricity production, which comes from the renewable energy sources. 5.7% comes from geothermal energy from El Salvador and Costa Rica. So in 2018, the SICA decided to create this technical group for geosciences, mainly specializing on geothermal. So in one of the operating plan, it includes the implementation of UNFC. Now, just a small introduction of BGR is the Federal Institute for Geosciences and Natural Resources. They have already 2 projects in the SICA region. So the first one is just the Yacimiento Uno project, which is just the identification of resources, geothermal resources, and now the Yacimiento Dos project, which now includes the local development in municipalities in Central America. So the results, we have an update of the actual geothermal development in each region, in the region. And then we had this classification of UNFC, and we have a little bit of manuals with geophysics, geochemistry, and remote sensing. So UNFC started in 2018 when BGR translated the geothermal specifications in Spanish. So it was promoted in GTG, or the technical group. And then in 2020, we had a training by the IGA expert. And then we tried to apply it in 2021 and 2022, mostly in El Salvador and Costa Rica. So what is UNFC? UNFC is the United Nations Framework Classification for Resources. It's a classification to make it easier for a project to be recognized by the investors and government and institutions to see how the project reflects maturity and uncertainty. It's a universally acceptable international applicable scheme for sustainable management of all energy and mineral resources. So we have here, they use 3 axes mainly: the economic, socio-economic viability, technical feasibility, and degree of confidence. So it's just a cube. You answer a lot of questions, and you come with all the numbers, and you try to locate if your project is viable or not viable. So it started in 1992 by the UNFC, UN Economic Commission for Europe. And then you can see, 1997, they started making the manuals for solid fuels and minerals. 2009, oil and gas and uranium. And 2016, with the agreement with IGA, they started putting the specifications for geothermal energy. The E-axis, as I told you, UNFC is based on 3 criteria. The E-axis, the environmental, social, economic viability. The F-axis is for technical feasibility and maturity studies and commitment studies to implement the project. And the G-axis is the level of confidence. The G-axis is where the geoscientific studies come. So you have here, if you have known sources where there are wells already and potential sources if you don't have wells. So we do a lot we answer a lot of questions. It's a flow diagram until you come if the project is viable or just not viable, okay? So UNFC is for government, industry, financial community, and creators of mineral and energy studies. So you can see here the government, so they are mostly the one managing the resources, the industry to provide data information, to deploy technology, management, and finance, the financial community, of course, who will allocate capital, and the creators of energy and mineral studies like LAGEO, which is a geothermal company in El Salvador. So I told you, the classification included all minerals, petroleum, renewables, uranium, injection, anthropogenic. And then these renewables was later expanded to geothermal. I just want to show you how they base the UNFC system. Is a project-based, so in oil and gas, you see there is extraction, processing, and sale. The same in renewable now with geothermal, is the source, extraction, and marketing products. So what they told is the project is the link between the renewable energy source and marketable quantities of energy project. So it's easier for the investors to see if the project is mature enough or you can invest in this project. So it provides the economic base, it's the basis for economic evaluation and decision making. So in September 2014, a memorandum of understanding was signed by UNECE and the IGA to develop a globally applicable harmonized standard reporting geothermal energy resources. So in 2015, there were volunteers, a geothermal working group, and here we have, I told you, Sulamit Castle, who is the head of the BGR project that we have in Central America. So Sulamit was the one who introduced us to UNFC, and then in 2016, there was the geothermal specifications was already endorsed as part of the manual of UNFC. So just a terminology for geothermal specifications. The source is the thermal energy contained in the rocks, okay? The sediments and or soils, including fluid contained underground or natural discharging. So the source is mostly the reservoir. The product is the one that is going to be sold. It's energy or the direct use application or heating. The resource is the cumulative quantities of geothermal energy products that you have already quantified. And the project that, as I told you, is the link between the geothermal energy source and the product. So again, I just want to show that this was introduced in Central America in 2018 in the Yacimiento Uno project, and then in Yacimiento Dos project, we have already the application in El Salvador and Costa Rica. So the course was introduced by Dr. Joya Falcone. She was a board member of IGA before, and UNFC expert. We had it in Costa Rica. And then we started applying it in Costa Rica, El Salvador. And then we had a chance to go to the United Nations, even if we were not part of the European Committee, because we were trying to promote UNFC in Central America. And then we started applying it in El Salvador. El Salvador, maybe some of you do not know, is the smallest country in Central America here. It's known as the land of volcanoes. It's only 21,000 square kilometers, but is characterized by major hydrothermal areas, hot springs, and fumaroles. In 1960s, the geothermal reconnaissance began in El Salvador by the help of United Nations. 1970s started exploration in Ahuachapan and Berlin, and our product is mainly for power generation, electricity. So we have 2 geothermal fields, Ahuachapan and Berlin. We have 209 megawatts installed, and we have 2 projects now, San Vicente and Chinameca, and the geothermal production of electricity in El Salvador is around 25% in the energy matrix. So what we did as a team evaluation, we had it mostly in the group of geologists, geochemists, and geophysicists. So we had the worksheet one, we have the evaluator and the project owner. Worksheet 2 is the project definition, and the worksheet 3 is the socioeconomic and regulatory factors. So you need to have a complete information before you do the classification. So we did it in 3 of our areas. For example, in Coatepeque, this is a big lake in El Salvador. So we had a classification of G4 prospective projects. It has a temperature, reservoir temperature, but the problem is the environmental permit because it's for tourists. And then the Cuyanao Sul, we have drilled 4 wells, but permeability is not so good, but temperature is around 270. So also in the classification we did, is a prospective project. And now Chinameca, the other project that we had 3 wells, we had a reservoir temperature, we calculated the capacity or the potential of the area, and it gave us a viable project. So the summary, we did a lot in our geothermal projects. It's like a portfolio of all the projects. And then we did all the classification and the summaries because it's going to be easier for investors to see what type. I didn't show you the graph here. If the project is really, I can get money from it or not. So the other German corporation in Sika is the GIZ. So what they did is they started making a digital platform. Instead of answering the questions in the flow diagram, they did a digital platform, just answering it, and then it's an automatic report generation. And you can tell what type of classification you have. So in 2023, we had to train some of the Sika countries, like Honduras, Nicaragua, Belize, and the Dominican Republic. And what lessons learned, it's a tool to standardize the classification criteria for projects on all stages. It's a good way to summarize the status of portfolio of projects and national inventory and present to potential investors. It's a highly useful tool for decision-making with regards to maturity of the projects and uncertainty, of resources, and highlighting the needs of funds, research, and logistical adjustment. It also helps in tracking the evolution of the stages of exploration and development history over time. And it can allow geothermal projects to be seen in similar footings on other renewable energies. The UNFC process must be enriched by the expertise of countries with long history on geothermal applications, which have not been given sufficient participation on this matter. For example, in El Salvador and Costa Rica, we did this as a pilot classification, but when we went to the United Nations, we asked them who is going to certify and accredit our classification. So IGA came, you know, IGA needs to be the one accrediting and helping us certify this UNFC classification. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for this very interesting presentation on the UNFC. Next up, we have Dr. Sven Teske. He is an associate professor and research director at the Institute for Sustainable Futures, the University of Technology, Sydney, Australia, with a research focus on energy decarbonization pathways for countries, regions, urban environments, and specific industry sectors towards net zero by 2050. Sven holds a PhD in economics from the University of Flensburg in Germany. Furthermore, he has 30 years experience in renewable energy markets and policy analysis, as well as solar and on and offshore wind power grid integration concepts in public grids. A very warm welcome to Dr. Sven Teske.
Thank you very much for having me. Start my watch here so I won't be over 10 minutes. As you probably hear from my accent, I'm what my colleagues call me a Germozzi, a German Australian. I studied engineering in Germany, and I am a professor now at the University of Technology, Sydney, over the past 10 years. And what I will do is I will basically provide a little bit an overview of what we do, and I'm not a geothermal expert, I'm a system engineer, and I'm trying to implement and integrate geothermal energy into wider energy plans for countries or for specific industries. But first, I would like to highlight the challenge. We are working on net zero pathways basically for the globe, for worldwide, and we do have a carbon budget in order to remain within 1.5 or maximum 2 degrees, as we agreed all at the Paris Climate Agreement. And that means the black line basically shows our emission development over the past 3 generations. And the red line is what we need to do. That's not a forecast. This is what we have to do in order to remain within the carbon budget. Basically, we have to reverse the energy supply towards a total decarbonizing energy supply within 1 generation, or 1.5. That means that the One Earth climate model, which we developed, is working with a carbon budget of about 400 to 420 gigatons CO2 between 2020 and 2050. The table here you see is the table published by the United Nations program, UNFCCC, at the assessment report 6, and it says with a 500 gigaton carbon emission, and that's cumulative. That's the entire carbon emission from 2020 until 2050, not the annual, means that we reach the goal with 50% to remain within a 1.5 degree temperature rise. So 100% is basically already not possible anymore. We try to develop processes where we reach that within a 67% likelihood. So what that means is we have all the different measures, not just energy, but also non-energy use, and non-energy emissions. And this is from deforestation, this is from food production, and those non-energy emissions are also from cement production or from other processes like the chemical industry. So we not only need to reduce within one generation our carbon emissions to zero, we also have to stop non-energy greenhouse gas emissions, stop deforestation, and start reforestation. So in order to explain a bit what we do with the One Earth climate model, I have only like one slide about the methodology. So the methodology is as follows. We basically take the entire, let's say we model a country, and we model, up until now we modeled about 42 countries worldwide, and the world as such. So we have the energy demand, or first the demand we have in terms of buildings, so housing, we have the demand for food, for transportation, for mobility, for consumptions of goods, and all those different things. So basically, we have first an analysis of the current energy demand. We break that down to all the different clusters under the global industry categorization standard. The reason why we break that down to altogether 165 different subcategories is that we need to come up with pathways for specific industry categorization standards, because those pathways are used, or those standards are used from investors to come up with mitigation pathways and targets for the finance industry. So for example, a big insurer like the Allianz has a target, and then they have funds and they cover specific GICS classes. So GICS class 15, for example, is materials, which includes cement and steel. So what they need is, they need to know the companies we invest in, do they have what current emissions they have, and what is the requirement for them to reduce over the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. So we do this. On the other side is, because we have a very specific demand, then we have to work on supply concepts, how to meet this demand. Is it electrification? Is it possible to electrify? Not everything is possible to electrify. You probably like to hear that in the geothermal conference. So we need to understand what kind of temperature level we need for specific processes. So for example, the chemical industry quite often needs 500 to 1,000 degrees, while heating obviously is under 100. So this is basically how we cluster. And then we need to understand every single technology good enough to know what is possible in a specific country, on a specific location. Can we actually integrate that as a technology, yes or no? And that's one of the reasons why I'm here as well. I want to learn far more about geothermal developments right now. The One Earth climate model is a target setting model, which means it is a model which defines a target. It is not a risk assessment model. A risk assessment model is a model where you run 10, 15, 100, 200 scenarios to know what happens if I don't do something. How long do I get away with not doing anything, and how much CO2 will be emitted? So we basically are two very different things. I'm not saying that the risk assessment scenarios are worse quality, are not good. It's just like it's a totally different purpose. What we do is we say this needs to be done in order to achieve that target. As I said, not a forecast. And we have very specific data for investors. We have the market development, for example, with a projection how many tons of steel will be produced, or aluminium, or how many square meters of residential buildings, and so on. We have the energy intensity, active, so that's in sort of product per kilometer per ton of steel. The energy intensity finance-based, which is sort of a second best thing. If if it's not possible to have a product, like for the textile industry, you can't just say how many kilometers of cloth. So basically you need then the finance, so in terms of megajoule per US dollar of currency GDP, and then we calculate the carbon intensity. And the scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions, which basically is again a mechanism to allocate the emissions to specific responsibility. Who is responsibility for those CO2 emissions? Scope 1 is basically yourself. If you're a producer of oil and gas, for example, this are your production. And scope 2 is basically the electricity you buy from a different provider, and scope 3 emissions is the product emissions. When you release that product, oil, for example, it will emit CO2. That is your scope 3 emission as an oil company. This is your scope 1 emission if you drive a car. We have pathways for a number of countries, for all the G20 countries and all the EU 27 countries very soon. And once we have those, we publish the results in terms of energy and emissions. And then it's just that's just one example here. We have the emission for different regions. We have the emissions historically. So from the beginning of industrialization until now, and then we have the emissions from now until 2050, until decarbonization. And then we basically put this together, divided by the current population, then we have a factor, and we basically suggest this for the United Nations as a global stocktake in order to allocate emissions in a fair basis to all the different countries. This is the emission factor here, and then we basically have the average on a global level. If you're below the line on the emission, you should receive funding. If you're above the line, you need to provide funding. This is again a graph about the different emissions. So the US, for example, has very high emission historically, but will have to reduce. China has not actually that low emissions anymore historically, and it will very soon be probably the highest emission of all, including history and future, as China right now represents 18% of the world population, but is responsible for 31% of global emissions. And then we do sensitivity analysis, what happens if there's a 5 or 7 year delay. And then the role of geothermal energy as a last step is geothermal energy, and Marit already said that this morning, is very important for us as we see that not everything is solar and wind. We have two different applications. We have applications to produce electricity, also we integrate that in our scenarios, but we can't do that obviously for all country because you need the resource. And then we have the vast majority of countries, actually the countries who actually need heating, will use in geothermal energy in one form or another, either directly or via heat pump. And my time is up, and I think the rest is maybe possible to discuss during the panel, and all the data is available online. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sven Teske. Next up is Pauline Lucas. She is an EU public affairs and policy expert. She specializes in EU energy policy with over 10 years of experience in Brussels, in EU associations, consultancy, and the European Commission. She is currently the policy director at Euroheat and Power, the association representing heating and cooling networks. She leads advocacy efforts on the EU stage to support the deployment of decarbonized heating and cooling networks, and has a background in law and European public affairs. A very heartfelt welcome, Pauline.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Let's set the watch. So I'm here to present the perspective of district heating and cooling network from our association, Euroheat and Power. The only thing you need to know, and we can meet after to discuss more, but the thing you need to know is that we are a trade association based in Brussels, promoting the interest of sustainable district heating and cooling. And I'm very honored to be here today. Being here talking about geothermal, it's a bit like perhaps being in Brussels talking about chocolate. So we have over 140 members. Here there are the logos. The only one that we are missing is perhaps the Icelandic District Heating Association. So happy to talk about that with the concerned people. But to tell you a little bit about district heating and cooling, we are serving 67 million consumers in Europe with over 17,000 networks and 13% of the heat market in average. So here to the right you can see that we can tap into many potential renewable and recovered heat sources. So you have a sample, and of course geothermal is representing a very high but untapped potential so far. So there's much more to tap into, and we already have 41.3% of renewable and recovered heat sources in our district heating and cooling mix, which means that basically our big challenge is to substitute the 60% remaining share, which is based on fossil fuels. Good news is that we have many options, and we also aim at growing, but growing green, of course. So we expect a growth up to 20% of the heat supply in 2030 and 48, so almost half, in 2050. So this is according to a study from the Aalborg University in Denmark. But today I wanted to give you a very, very brief overview with two highlights of a package, a legislative package that was made of several files that was just finalized actually in the previous month. We've been working on this for 2 years with other EU associations, including the Geothermal Association, and we came to fruition with this package. And we really believe that this is a solid foundation to roll out district heating infrastructure, but also a district heating infrastructure that is connected to renewable and recovered heat sources. So here you have basically an overview, but what I want you to remember is that this package, Fit for 55, is made of several legislation. So on buildings are our end user for the residential sector, so very important to decarbonize them. Energy efficiency, because this is the first fuel, we say, so it's very important to use renewable, but also use them efficiently. Renewables, energy directive, and last but not least, the emission trading system, because the end goal is obviously to tackle climate change and reduce our green gas emissions. But as I said, there are two things that I would like to show you that are really important for district heating and cooling network. The first one is the new definition of efficient district heating and cooling network. So this is part of the Energy Efficiency Directive, and basically this is our trajectory for the district heating and cooling sector to go towards 2050 and becoming carbon neutral, or have 100% renewable and wasted energy in our district heating networks. So this is basically all the milestones that you can see. I will not go into details, but you can see that already from 2040 there are high shares of renewable and wasted energy included. And I think what's also interesting to see is that from 2030, if you build district heating or you substantially refurbish district heating, you will not be able, if you want to be compliant with this definition, to add any fossil fuel capacity. So 2030 is the breaking date. This definition is not per se mandatory, so you can continue run your network outside of it. However, this is conditional to other legislation. So if you want to connect, for instance, zero-emission buildings, you can only connect to an efficient district heating and cooling network. Or if you want state aid, you also have to comply with this definition. So we expect that there should be a strong incentive for our networks to already take steps to reach climate neutrality. And if they're not compliant, they will also have to, for larger networks above 5 megawatts, they will have to establish a plan to show how they will fulfill these milestones. So this is a bit checks and balances to push the sector forward. So that was the first important piece of legislation. The second one I wanted to show you is also for district heating rollout, very important, not only for district heating, also for geothermal and other renewable heat sources, is the local heating and cooling plans. And I think perhaps in the panel we will discuss what are the best practice in terms of tapping into this potential of renewable energies. But for district heating, it's really crucial because we in infrastructure, we need to rely on cities to enable the rollout of the infrastructure. And I think what is also key is to know what is the demand, what kind of locally renewable or recovered type of heat sources are available in order to tap into them. So we really expect that they should boost the deployment of the infrastructure and also the use of renewables. This is for larger cities, so above 45,000 inhabitants, and this is also not, this is mandatory to establish these plans, but not to implement them. But we will speak about this a bit later, I suppose. So these were the two big takeaways that I wanted to show you that we think are going to boost renewables in district heating and cooling networks. So you may ask, okay, we have this big package and I only show you two measures, but there are many more. What are we going to do now? So the EU is at a turning point. We have an election this year, actually next week. So if you can go vote. So we will have in June a new parliament and in November a new European Commission, so with a new president and new commissioners. So basically this will bring also new opportunity to go beyond what's adopted. Not to say we work really hard on this package, we don't want to reopen everything, but there might be more that can be done. So in terms of this post-2030 framework, what will be important? We will have an amendment to the climate law, so it will mean that now we currently have a 2040 greenhouse gas emission reduction target of 55%, Fit for 55. And now the member states and the parliament will adopt also a target for 2040. So to put ourselves on the trajectory to 2050 and hopefully accelerate a little bit, because we know that the further we go, the more difficult it will be to achieve this reduction. The Commission has also evoked a possibility for industrial decarbonization deal. That is going to be really important because on the one hand, we already have a lot of this industry in Europe to decarbonize Europe, but we need to foster this homegrown renewable. So we have technology, but we need to increase the capacity. So how to do that? And also on the other hand, how this green industry is going to help the other part of the industry, manufacturing industry, for instance, to decarbonize while remaining competitive. These are the big challenges. So this will also have to be tackled. We will also have the heat pump action plan, hopefully, that has been postponed, hopefully published. This also has to do with geothermal. And We are also looking into the revision of a heating and cooling strategy. This is quite old. I think we have a next speaker that will mention that, so I will not go too much into details, but what's important is that geothermal, solar thermal, these are sources that we can tap into, but they have these specificities, and we need to keep talking about them. We need to keep talking about heating and cooling. I'll just perhaps close my presentation by showing you that implementation in member states is already going on. Some of them are front runners, so it's quite interesting to see that there are already geothermal framework without waiting for a geothermal strategy from the EU level that are in place. But I think I'm over time, so I will stop there and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pauline, and thank you for staying within the 10-minute limits, because we're going to have a seat and have a chat afterwards, which I think is going to be very fruitful, and I urge you to prepare some questions for our panelists. Next up is Heimir Tryggvason. He's a specialist at the National Energy Authority of Iceland. Heimir holds a PhD, is a mechanical engineer. He's a specialist in direct use of geothermal energy and district heating systems. His role involves data collection and analysis on heat utilization, technical advice to the administration on energy matters related to district heating, energy efficiency, and so forth. He's also participating in international collaborations, contributing Icelandic expertise to promote the use of geothermal energy. Welcome, Heimir.
Thank you, Harpa. Now, what I wanted to share with you here today is a little bit maybe a specific story on a system that we have developed here in Iceland. It's a subsidy system to reflect a little bit on the topic of policies and frameworks and the tools and how they affect our development of geothermal. And I will show you how this specific system has positively affected it and also how it a little bit adversely is affecting it. I start with a little bit of background. I'm very glad that we have the big screen. It's not always sure that you can see everything. But this is a map of Iceland, and this shows urbanated areas in Iceland. Mind you that, and the size of the dots is obviously showing the population. Mind you that the smallest dots are 50 to 500, so we might be stretching the concept of urbanated a little bit because a lot of them show less than 100 people. Now, the colors indicate how we heat our houses, basically. So the red dots are geothermal district heating systems. The blue dots are showing where we use electricity mainly. The light blue ones are direct use of electricity. The dark blue, especially there in Westfjords, are where we have district heating systems that mainly use electricity to power up the system, but they also use oil a little bit as well, but we don't discuss that, do we? Now, as you see, and there are three takeouts that I want from here is the population density. This is probably a global issue. This escape from the countryside into the capital areas, and we have 75% of our population on the southwest corner, surrounding Reykjavik, in an hour's distance from Reykjavik. The cold areas, as many of you know, we have the oldest bedrock in the west part and in the east part, and there we have our cold areas. And of course, in these areas, the heating costs are much higher than with the geothermal district heating systems. And thirdly, I want to point out that we have many red dots on the map, and this has a lot to do with an effort that was here in the 70s and the 80s, support by the government, supporting development of geothermal district heating. And of course, since then, we have continued to support it, but in a little bit different manner. So I'm not going to dive deeply into our energy policy. We had a new energy policy introduced in 2020. There is a specific objective in that policy that I want to draw out. That's this equal access to the energy countrywide. And there's not too much specifics in the policy on that state something regarding geothermal specifically. But this one does, and also regarding energy security around the country. And that's mainly talks into development of geothermal district heating, because this is very important to us. Also like to point out that this is in very much in harmony with other policy in Iceland, namely the regional development policy. And we can see before these policies, we had legislation and parliamentary resolutions that draw up basically the policy of the government. And this has been a discussion item in Iceland for decades. This regional development and of course our geothermal district heating systems. Now, one of the systems that we have carved out is a subsidy system that subsidizes space heating for residential heating. Now, we have been supporting space heating since the 70s, basically since the oil crisis in some form or way, but we have been subsidizing electricity directly since '82. Our legislation that we follow today is from 2002, and of course this is to balance out or equalize the living costs for the more fragile areas where heating costs are higher. Now, it's specified specifically in the legislation that the transmission and distribution costs of electricity are to be subsidized fully in the case where we are using electricity directly for heating. We also have our district heating systems, and they get support as well, but that's the aim there is more to equalize because they are more efficient and they don't get as much support. But also, and luckily, it's also written into the legislation that partly the budget should be used for energy saving and support of geothermal energy, or the expansion of geothermal district heating systems. And how we use that support, we can see here on the pie chart. The energy saving part there is 3%, and that's actually written into the legislation that up to 3% should be used for energy saving. Over the years, like I say, this is over 20 years old legislation. There have been different focus points, but early on, building restoration, insulation, etc. Recent years, heat pumps have gotten a lot of support and still do, and we are also started looking a little bit into shallow geothermal. But the bigger part there of energy saving efforts is the expansion of geothermal district heating systems. This pie chart shows us numbers that are averaged over 10 years. So that green part fluctuates a little bit, what's happening, what companies are expanding, etc. But on average, this is 10% of the budget. And we have had good results, I have to say. We haven't done a very good job of following up on what the effect has been, but we see that the trend is about 2 gigawatts yearly that we free up of electricity. We have, of course, increased use of renewable energy around the country, and this has shown a very positive effect on regional development in the areas where we have expanded these district heating systems. But I also want to mention that district heating is an urban technology, and we have pulled this out, I think, to its limits a little bit, because we are showing very, very low efficiency in many of these systems where we have pulled out pipes on the countryside, basically. Now maybe, and of course this is the positive effect that we have had, but to maybe reflect a little bit on the negative effects. First, I wanted to show you just, common heating prices in Iceland. So this is all geothermal district heating prices. The low price is actually in a municipality close to Reykjavík, in Seltjarnarnes. They have constantly been quite low, had quite low prices. They're very lucky with the resources very close to them. The median price there is actually the district heating system in Reykjavík. So this is and it's by far the largest system in Iceland. So that kind of creates the average. But and I didn't mark it as a high price there, but it's a new district heating system that was commissioned in late year in 2020. And late year 2020. And because, as was mentioned this morning in the opening plenary, of course, what we are dealing with district heating systems is a very high capex cost. So, and we've seen this, and historically, new systems have high tariffs, and users pay higher prices. And historically, we've seen a lot higher difference between the median price and the highest price that we see, up to 300%, while we have, close to 100% there. Now, to lay on top of that, I want to show you how the electricity prices, subsidized electricity, how that has developed for the last decade. As you see there, in those pink and red line, the pink line, of course, being sort of the lower end of the market. So energy providers, we are, of course, as the rest of Europe, we have a market for electricity. And this is adjusted for inflation. So since like 2018, 2019, we can see that the prices have been stable despite quite high inflation over that time. So adjusted for inflation, it decreases. And we have subsidized, or prices for subsidized electricity that are actually lower than what the highest district heating systems are. And this creates a little bit of a dilemma. And actually, this is something that I think we need to address, and especially when we take into consideration that there are possibilities of further savings when you're using electricity directly, because we are also subsidizing heat pumps, and you can lower your electricity bill by at least half. So district heating at the highest prices is no longer competitive with direct electricity. So I think this is something, and I'm very glad to see my colleagues from the ministry here. So we have some work to do, because I think this is something that needs to be fixed. Thank you.
And to our last speaker, thank you, Heimir. We have, last but not least, mind you, Ágústa Þorbergsdóttir. She's a country manager for Iceland at Fortescue. Ágústa has over 15 years of international work experience working within the EU and international finance institutions. She is an expert on EU energy climate and energy policy. She has sound knowledge of the EU's new financial market landscape, is an expert in program management and international finance in climate and energy-related investments. Welcome, Ágústa.
Thank you, Harpa. Just one exciting news. I just got a message that we might have a new eruption starting very soon. At least they evacuated Grindavík. So today I'm not going to talk about the EU taxonomy and geothermal, but you're very welcome to come and speak to me afterwards, because I think there are other issues which are more interesting. So as Harpa said, I now work for Fortescue, at least one man here in the audience that knows what Fortescue is. Fortescue is an Australian company, predominantly a mining company in iron ore, the fourth largest in the world. I work for the energy part of Fortescue that's building hydrogen and ammonia projects worldwide. And why am I talking about geothermal? Because that's been my passion for a long time, and I used to work in geothermal before I joined Fortescue. But what Fortescue is doing is the only large industrial company in the world that's actually going for real zero. So we have a very ambitious decarbonization pathway, which is fully funded with $6 billion US. So we are also leading technological advancement when it comes to mining, etc., technology, equipment. There you see our green pioneer at COP in Dubai, which is a ship that has been converted to use ammonia as a fuel. So, as I said, I work for the green energy part, but let's go to the topic of today. I think it's different when being an Icelander and growing up with geothermal and just the benefits that has given us. I've often thought about, how many people would live in Iceland if we didn't have geothermal? Maybe 50,000. And those who have been, today is maybe not portraying, how it is to live in Iceland, because most of the time the weather here is quite shitty. But with geothermal and all the hot water, it actually makes it quite livable. And this is what I used to preach in my previous job. The greatest potential of geothermal energy use is in the district heating, cooling systems, and direct use. And I think what we need to ask, and also, if you think about geothermal, why isn't it used more widely? Because there is quite good applicability in the EU as a general. Maybe, this crowd probably knows it, but most people don't know that there's a geothermal district heating in Paris, for example. And I think what we as geothermal ambassadors need to do is to talk more about it and showcase and show the policymakers, show the others that this is something that's achievable. Does anyone remember the EU heating and cooling strategy that was launched? Yes, thank you, in 2015, and with the report of strategy in 2016. Actually, the Icelandic industry, together with the ministries at that time, worked pretty closely with the EU Commission when it came to geothermal. And then after this strategy was launched. And there was actually talks about having an Icelandic national expert at DG Energy in Brussels to help them understand geothermal. And we had then the Commissioner for Energy also came to the Icelandic Geothermal Conference at that time. And as Pauline has said before, the heating sector, it accounts for almost 50% of EU total energy consumption, and most of it is still fossil. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot of potential. Big part of it can be geothermal. So most of you are probably familiar with this, and I'm gonna walk quite fast through this. EU has the most ambitious climate neutral policy in the world. And what does that give to us as an industry or as a renewable industry in general? It gives us the opportunity to accelerate things, because all the business opportunities on how to go forward actually lie in the law, which makes it so interesting. And the Fit for 55 package, which has been mentioned before, this is where, the different directives and regulations are where we need to look to find the opportunities and what we can do. Here I've listed the most relevant ones. Also with the European climate law, energy and climate were merged into one, which makes it even more important and in the front run of the European Union. You have, the most important directive there is the Renewable Energy Directive that sets out what the countries need to do when it comes to the use of renewable resources, including, when it comes to heating and cooling and potential geothermal. Also important is the governance legislation and the national energy and climate plans, because there the countries have to set out what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And a revision of these plans is due very shortly. Other very interesting is the ETS, and that ETS too, where buildings will be part of the ETS. So it will make fossil heating more expensive. Also, other references, Net Zero Industry Act actually mentions geothermal technology, so there are more and more opportunities which are opening up when it comes to geothermal. But in general, what are the key levers of the European climate policy? It's the binding targets, meaning that countries, they need to do what the law says. It's carbon pricing, and that's maybe one of the most effective ones because it will cost more to pollute. And then you have, how you do it, all the regulations and standards, and then also as important, which has also been shown here in Iceland, how funding and incentives actually help incentivizing district heating and use of geothermal. And when it comes to geothermal, how will the RED 3 revision help us? It's increased and binding targets, it's simpler permitting, heat purchase agreements, and skills training and certification. I'm just going to run very quickly through that because I think this has been covered before. And as this is also what has been covered by Pauline, so I'm going to run. I'm sorry, our presentation's a bit covers the same thing. But I want to stop here a bit again. It's the heating and cooling assessment and planning. That is that will become a requirement, also tied to the national energy and climate plans. If you think, inward, when we think of Iceland, what story can we tell? What is, from my side, what can we do as a country, as an industry, as an experts, to help fight the climate crisis? From my point of view, is to tell the geothermal story. How we did it, step by step, where it's applicable. And of course, we cannot do it, everywhere. It's mostly in urban centers, and then there are other applications. Maybe you can. Also, there's the heat in Europe is not the temperature of the water is not as high as in Iceland. So maybe you can couple it with heat pumps, etc. But that's a technical issue that can be worked out. But this, because the most hindrance for geothermal is that people don't know it. It's beneath your feet, so you can't see it. And when it comes to, again, the Energy Efficiency Directive and heating and cooling supply, I actually have to say I don't find this very ambitious, but maybe this is realistic, because a lot of the heat that's provided in the district heating system today is actually cogeneration of fossil fuels, where you have electricity production with fossil fuels combined with cogeneration of heating. Of course, it's efficient use of the resource, but this is also what will probably be a hindrance for rapid uptake of renewable district heating. This I'm also just gonna hop over, but what have we going for us? We have the world's most ambitious and well-developed policy for a decarbonized system. The EU also focuses on market creation, so we need to think about the business models as well. The end users, who is the market creator, etc., etc. You can say that renewable heating and cooling is a key to the energy transformation, and how can we, where does geothermal fit in? How can we help find out, which areas, not only technically, but also when it comes to the heat, but also feasibly with the systems that are in place and where district heating systems can be built up. But we need to look to the future and see what is feasible. It's on the table that the heating and cooling, the revision of the heating and cooling strategy. And the European Parliament has also called on the European Commission to present an EU geothermal strategy. And then I actually call on the industry in Iceland and on the government to work closely with the EU government on this policy so they can learn how we have benefited by using geothermal, especially direct utilization. And then when you look also at the barriers is that, mapping and accessibility of data. This is specifically relevant for Eastern Europe because lots of this ties to oil exploration, and this is very confidential data. How can that be used for geothermal? Lack of financing, as has been discussed, the capex is so high and no one wants to finance that. How can we create some innovative financing scheme to enable this development? And then bottlenecks for permitting, but that goes across for the renewable sector. So this is my last slide, and thank you very much. Look forward to answer your questions.
So I want to ask all the panelists to please join me on the stage and have a seat. Ég ætla að fá að vera hérna á endanum. We are a little bit rushed for time, but I would love to have a fruitful discussion, however. So please talk fast. No, I'm kidding. Be concise is maybe better wording. Thank you all for your very insightful presentations. It's fantastic to have such a diverse group of people, even though you are all like-minded probably, but it's a different, like a spectrum where you have different expertise. I want to start by going the round and ask you, even though it's a very pessimistic question, what would you see as the largest hindrances in the legal and regulatory system for the advancement of geothermal development? I assume you all have an opinion on this. So just like the big picture, since we don't have that much time. If we start with you, Heimir.
Well, I actually don't think that we have large hindrances in Icelandic policy. We have to be mindful to design our systems so, for example, just what I was talking about, that they don't adversely affect what we're trying to get, because it's definitely part of the policy to increase district heating or geothermal district heating, but still we have a policy that just by a technicality somehow works against that objective. So we have to be mindful when we create our legislation that we don't put in some speed bumps that aren't really apparent when we put it in, but can at a later stage be.
To be a little bit PC, when I say hindrances, of course I'm asking about the opportunities that we can take. But I mean, we're talking about status quo, so let's talk about the hindrances. Elizabeth, from your point of view.
You know, the Latin American country is a little bit behind, like what I told before. Maybe the Central American countries, they need more technical expertise. They need more training. They need more exposure, because some of the countries like El Salvador and Costa Rica, they are a little bit advanced. But some of the countries are just starting. So we need a little bit more expertise. We need to also apply the direct use, which we are starting right now. But of course, we need more technical expertise. Yeah.
Good. Sven.
I think there are two main hindrances from my point of view. One is the existing infrastructure. If you have an existing heating system based on gas, you want to squeeze the last dollar out of it before you change to a different system. And that's exactly the problem we have right now in many different technologies, that the existing technology, mainly fossil fuels, blocking actively, manipulating policies to actually slow down the development in order to operate their system as long as possible. And secondly, the policies need to reflect the different technologies. So for example, geothermal, I'm not a geothermal expert, I'm an energy systems energy expert, but I realized that drilling is obviously important and is a risk. And so we need insurances for drillings, for example, for project development. Obviously, you don't need that for wind development, but wind development has other risks. So not one size fits all, but actually manufacture or basically develop policies to the technology so you have a right mix of different technologies.
Thank you.
I think firstly, fossil fuel subsidies, we need to stop that. That's the first obstacle I see. There is still too much, probably not in Iceland, but still in many EU countries. There is in the energy performance of building a ban on fossil fuel subsidies for individual standalone boilers, so that goes in the right direction. And then I think, as Egil said, we need to direct these subsidies to the clean heat, to the renewables. So that's one. And the second, I think, is John, so the structure of Sven's argument. The second is then the funding aspects. I think we've heard that there are high capital costs for geothermal. It's also the case for other types of renewable. It's of course also the case for the rollout of the infrastructure. And I agree, we have a lot of fossil fuels cogeneration, and we do squeeze it to the last because you don't want to change something that's in invested assets. So we need the right targeted funding to make this happen. And maybe one last thing, it's the ban versus plan approach. So you don't want to be punitive, you don't want to ban things, but you want to provide a framework that will incentivize people or cities to make the right choice.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to agree. It's the prolongation with subsidies and other policy levers of the fossil fuel industry that is making this transformation on all levels very difficult. So you need to work, I'm trying to look at the opportunities here, where you can work with the municipalities also to help them to plan, provide incentives, financial incentives to change, from fossil fuel to more greener heating and cooling, geothermal where suitable, etc. And also just, I think, enlighten and educate, both municipalities, government, and also the general public on the benefits. I think, throughout my work in geothermal, probably most of the one impactful experience I had when I was in Romania and Oradea many years ago, there was a geothermal project there. We are drilling some geothermal wells. And there's an old lady that comes up to me and she says, why can't I have geothermal like my friend in Beiuș? That's a town in Romania with geothermal heating, has been for many years. She pays 1/3 of what I pay for heating. And, that's important as well.
Exactly. Just keep the microphone there for a little bit. I want to ask the both of you, since you have the EU aspect, do you think geothermal is getting enough emphasis? I mean, are we looking enough towards geothermal in the EU context?
No, because I think the knowledge is lacking there. It's among scientists and some very small group, but as I said, it's our responsibility to spread the knowledge and the gospel of geothermal.
Mm-hmm.
This one. Oh yeah. Yeah, so something that you said in your presentation, and we discussed, like, but we have this package, but what happens for geothermal? But I think in 2016, I remember when the strategy was published, there was no momentum for heating and cooling. Now, just 2 weeks ago, we had 15 member states, EU member states, calling to do more for heating and cooling. The momentum is there. Unfortunately, the momentum is also based on the war and the energy crisis that resulted. But I think this is a huge push. And also, we've seen in the parliament. In December, the EU Parliament adopted own initiative report, so not legislative, but on geothermal. And this was amazing to see the amount of consensus. Not a single group in the Parliament has voted against. There is a consensus around something in the EU that's never seen. So the momentum is there.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask, because Sven was talking a little bit about the fact that the exploration is very costly and that the de-risking is so important. And I know the history here in Iceland, so I want to ask you, Heimir, what have you done here in Iceland to help de-risk and move geothermal forward?
Well, I mentioned it a little bit on my my background slide there, the number of red dots. Most of them came about with the support that the government basically gave out to the municipalities, because the municipalities were the ones that were developing these geothermal district heating systems. But they basically did that. They de-risked it. So they were provided with loans, and if the exploration was unsuccessful, the loans partly were reverted to grants.
Yes.
So that had a lot to say on both how fast it went, because in 20 years, a lot of these systems were developed, and it was really taken out to the edge of where at the time it was feasible to explore geothermal and try to utilize it. So, and of course, in the coming years, I mean, we have continued, not with the same effort, but this is probably the most effective one. Mm-hmm. And maybe to expand a little bit on it, because we are always talking about that we need to fund geothermal exploration more. I have often wondered, would we do it the same way today? Mm-hmm. Because we have a completely different society. We have privatized a lot more of what we are doing. Back there, I don't think, or I think there was a complete consensus on doing it, because it was the government just supporting the municipalities. So it's an interesting thought. How would we go about if we were in the same position today? Because we have really moved a lot of this, the part to play from the government to other entities, not necessarily private, but other entities.
Well, if we hadn't done this back then, I am doubtful that we would all be living here today and that you would be visiting Iceland and enjoying your visit, actually. Sven, did you want to add to that?
I'm basically, I lived in two different societies. I mean, I lived a long time in Germany, which has more social democratic background and a green background, and Australia has more sort of a trades sort of and liberal background. And what I hear in Australia all the time is don't pick winners. And I strongly disagree with that. You actually have to make specific strategic decisions in policies which are long-term, longer than your next election, like in 3 years or so, in order to develop a resilient technology system. And there are specific sort of steps you need to take. And one is a specific long-term decision for heating, if you need heating in your country. And district heating is a long-term, very smart solution, but it will not be able to implement that with a tendering system, which is so sort of popular. So we basically let compete all the different heating systems with each other. I don't think that works, but that's actually a problem in a specific environment where everything needs to be tendered and not specifically decided sort of strategically. And I don't know how to actually push that forward in policy, but we need that.
A decision.
A decision.
Yeah.
And then don't change it next month, but actually stick to it the next 10 or 20 years.
I'm curious, Elizabeth, what do you think is the environment, I mean the regulatory framework in El Salvador? The regulatory framework in El Salvador, is it working for the advancement of geothermal, or is it something that has to be done so that things can move faster, or the policy of the government even?
No, El Salvador is a little bit more advanced than other countries, Central American countries. And LAGEO is the only company now as part of the politics of the government. LAGEO is the only one who can have the concession of geothermal, the geothermal projects. And in El Salvador, we have a cooperation with the GROW GTP.
Yep.
And we do a diploma course for Latin American countries. And then I think it's one way of training and divulging geothermal. But the problem is, in some countries, they don't have geothermal. So we're training geothermal students, and they don't have geothermal. But we're trying, trying to for them to be aware of geothermal, the application. And we have some, for example, the World Bank for El Salvador, they help us in our geoscientific studies in some of our exploration areas. So I think in some countries we need also some funding from the World Bank or another bank that can help explore the other potential, geothermal potential of other countries. But El Salvador is, I cannot say bad for El Salvador because I worked there for more than 20 years. And I'm a Filipina, and El Salvador has given me all the chance to be part of the geothermal world and to be part of the IGA and to be part of WING and everything.
Exactly. We are over time, I am aware of that. Maybe do you want to take maybe one more round? Or I don't think we have time, unfortunately, to involve the audience in the questioning, but if you want to maybe share one takeaway that we should all keep in mind, something that is top of mind for you for the advancement of geothermal. If we start with you, Ágústa.
Yeah, I think, I have to go back to knowledge sharing then, that people understand what geothermal is. I'm going to take two examples which are not directly connected to district heating, but geothermal use in general. Both to the title of my presentation, there is a fight to get geothermal as taxonomy classified as a green investment class. And then also for more to the sector I work in now is, in hydrogen, ammonia, and fuels of the future. Many of these fuels need CO2, but CO2 from geothermal power plants cannot be used for fuels to be classified as renewable fuels of biological origin, of non-biological origin. And this is, something we need to change. So,
thank you.
Okay, I'm a lobbyist, so I will give one simple message to take home. We have a huge challenge decarbonizing buildings in the industry, but the good news is we have many resources that we can tap into, so we need to plan and implement this plan now.
I turn it around, and the reason why I'm here is I want to learn more about geothermal technology, what it can. I'm an energy modeler, so the best thing is to tell us modelers what can you do for the energy supply in the future, and what temperature level. So I'm basically, what we are trying to do is, okay, solar and wind is a lot, but not everything. So we need to know better how can we integrate different technologies of geothermal and where, because if you look at the modeling publications of energy models, you will see that our model is one of the more sophisticated and very high technical resolution, and still we probably underrepresent geothermal. And that's just because geothermal is not mainstream. And I think that is sort of a little bit lessons learned for me. I learned from the ammonia part, for example, what you just said. We need all the different little aspects to put it together to one concept, and that's basically it, so communicate better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, just a commercial. So I just want to tell you that next year, 2025, we're going to have a Latin American Geothermal Conference to unite all the Latin American countries. And it's going to be in El Salvador because Ahuachapan, one of our fields, is going to be 50 years old. So it's beyond sustainability. So we're going, if you can come to El Salvador, you're all welcome.
Thank you. Heimir.
Yeah, well, on a global level, I'll have to agree with Ágústa, some sort of capacity building. We work a lot with Eastern European countries, actually, and we can see there that there's a lot need to be done there. Looking maybe closer to home, I think we need to do more on research on a collective level. We have done, of course, a lot of research. Some of it, though, is getting a little bit dated, and we have new technology and new methods to do, and we have excellent researchers that want to do more, but we're lacking the finance for it. So I think we need to address that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. It's 12:10, and I know everyone is hungry. I had a very inspirational final words that I was going to read to you, but I think I will just say thank you for participating, for bearing with us for an hour and a half, and enjoy Iceland, enjoy your lunch, and I hope you will be able to go back, given the fact that it looks like we have a new volcanic eruption on our hands. Hopefully it's not going to close the flight areas. But what I wanted to say is, I think geothermal has so much potential. I think it has been seen as the ugly duckling in the mix for years now. And what we have to do to make it a swan is just to talk and to share knowledge like we have been doing here today, and hopefully we will continue to do. So thank you to all the distinguished panelists. Thank you for listening, and enjoy IGC and Iceland.